Hi, this is Frank Daske from Layer 2, and I will show you today how easy it is to connect any existing SharePoint 2007 or 2010 list to external data sources using the SharePoint Business Data List Connector. In the first step, we have to create the list that will contain the data in the end. We go to lists and create, in this case, a custom list, but you can use any list types you want, and I will call this list supplier. Press create, and there's the list. So now I switch to list settings, and here I see there's a new entry here in the list settings that appears only if the business data list connector is installed and activated. And I press simply connect to external data source. Now I have to configure the connection. First I have to choose the connection provider. Choose any providers installed. You can use ODBC, OLEDB, or any other installed .NET based providers. I choose SQL Server in this case. Then you have to enter a connection string to your data source. Connection string isn't something specific for Business Data List Connector. Nearly any data source has a connection string. You can find it in the internet, and in this case I build a connection to the SQL Server database Northwind with given user ID and password, and I press validate, and it validates the connection. Next I have to enter a select statement to my data source table, and in this case I want to have the data from the table of view suppliers. I validate this, and I can have a preview of my data, and I see here there's one data source field that is used as some kind of primary key, the supplier ID, and I will enter it here as primary key. I validate this, and it's successful. As a next step, I have to create the structure of the SharePoint list. So I click Add Columns, and all database fields were mapped to list columns in SharePoint. Here's one mapping error, and I check mappings for this, and I see all data source fields are correctly mapped to SharePoint list columns by name, and I can change the column type afterwards manually if required. I see one field or one column in SharePoint that is not mapped to my data source, that is the content type. I think this is by design. And now I'm ready to update my data. Got a message that list items are possibly modified. Press continue, and 25 items are added to my SharePoint list, which is because of the demo limitations in this case. If I enable write back, I can propagate my changes that are done in the SharePoint list directly to my data source. And I can enable background update for the other direction. If something is changed in database, it will be updated in the SharePoint list by default every hour, but you can specify this more detailed later on. So I press OK because I'm finished and go to the supplier list, and here's my data.